Y adolescentes venidos de 8 institutos diferentes de distintas partes del país se han juntado hoy aquí en la Plaza de España para conversar con uno de los intelectuales más importantes de nuestro tiempo, Michael Ignatieff. Michael Ignatieff, para quien no le conozcáis, es ensayista, es escritor y es una de esas figuras para quienes la reflexión, para quienes el análisis y el trabajo teórico siempre ha de estar guiado y ha de estar orientado por un interés de transformar el mundo y de hacer del mundo un lugar más libre, más justo, más habitable para todos y para todas. De ahí que Michael, en un momento dado, decidiera bajar a la arena política de su país, de Canadá, llegando incluso a liderar el Partido Liberal de allí durante unos 3 años. Hoy contamos con él dentro de este acto que se enmarca en las conmemoraciones que ya hace unos meses venimos celebrando como país, celebrando el inicio del camino que hoy, hace 50 años, empezamos a recorrer hacia la democracia. Por ello, quería agradecer al comisionado para la celebración de España 50 años en libertad, el apoyo prestado al festival y el haber posibilitado que todos vosotros y que todas vosotras podáis estar aquí con nosotros. Y también poder contar también con la presencia de Michael Ignatieff, a quien quisiera invitar a que subiera al escenario y a quien pido que le deis un fuerte aplauso. Michael. Bueno, Michael, es un placer tenerte aquí con nosotros hoy.
Thank you.
Es un placer. Antes de empezar, ya te lo contaba abajo, pero quisiera agradecer a cada uno de los institutos que nos acompañáis en la tarde de hoy, tanto a los profesores como a todos los alumnos y las alumnas que habéis venido, algunos de muy lejos, para estar aquí todos juntos. Quería dar las gracias al IES Padre Feijó, de Gijón, al IES Marqués de Villena, de Navarra, al IES Andalán, de Zaragoza, también al IES Miguel de Cervantes, de Sevilla, y también a los institutos de Madrid, al IES Renacimiento, al IES La Cabrera, al IES Beatriz Galindo y al Colegio Lourdes. Todos ellos en estas semanas... Un aplauso, un aplauso, un aplauso. Bueno, Michael, todos los alumnos de esos institutos que te mencionaba han estado trabajando en estas semanas previas sobre tu obra, en particular sobre 2 de tus libros, Virtudes locales y En busca del consuelo. Yo ahora he hecho la presentación, pero les voy a ceder la voz a quienes conocen de primera mano porque han leído los textos, que son los alumnos y las alumnas. Así que, sin más dilación, quería dar paso a los representantes del IES Marqués de Villena, de Navarra, que son Marta y Jordan, y que han estado reflexionando sobre la tolerancia, que es una de esas virtudes cotidianas que tú estudias en tu libro de ese título. Y a propósito de lo que te querían plantear una reflexión y una pregunta. Así que Marta y Jordan, no sé si les podéis... No sé dónde se encuentran. Ahí Marta y Jordan. No sé si les podéis pasar el micrófono para que puedan preguntar a Michael. Y un fuerte aplauso para ambos.
Hola, Michael. Nuestra pregunta es, ¿cómo podemos fomentar la práctica de la tolerancia cotidiana en las comunidades donde las divisiones culturales son más marcadas?
Well, thank you, first of all. Here's something I want you to remember, if you remember nothing else that I say in the next hour. Do not be like me. Learn another language. I don't speak Spanish. Don't get yourself in that position. Learn Spanish, Russian. Oh, do you know Spanish? Italian, English. Learn languages. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say to answer this question is When I was your age, in 1965, in Toronto, Canada, yes, I'm that old, I didn't know a single gay person. I didn't have a single friend who was not white. I regarded women as I have to admit, a lesser species. I'm giving myself a hard time. What you need to appreciate, I think, is how much has changed in the lifetime of a person my age. It wasn't that there were no gay people in Toronto, there were plenty of them, but they weren't allowed to speak. They weren't allowed to be themselves. I grew up in a world in which there was segregation in the American South. Blacks didn't even have the vote. They didn't have the vote in South Africa. They didn't have a vote in the United States. Women had the vote. Women had done heroic work during the Second World War, but many men felt like I did. We loved women, but we thought we were the boss. All of this has changed. And to your question, the Toronto that I grew up in was full of people who looked like me. In 2034, in another 8 years, I will be a minority in my own city. It will be majority non-white, non-Christian. And it's one of the greatest cities in the world, by the way, and if you haven't been to Toronto, you should go to Toronto. So what I'm saying is that we have lived 70 years of the most important change in some ways in the history of the world, and you are the beneficiaries. This is our gift to you. It's a problem, but I look around this place and I see a new society, a society that didn't exist in my time. And what is it based on? It's based on one idea, which is equality. Equality for men and women, equality for straights and gays, equality for people of all colors and races and convictions, equality for Christians, Muslims, Jews, and anybody else, equality for atheists. This is the new charter for mankind, and you have to defend it. Don't let it be taken away, because it's the best thing we did. There are lots of problems in the world, and we'll talk about the problems. But don't forget the distance we came. Don't forget the equality that we achieved, that makes, for many of you, your lives possible. Do I think you have equality? No. I'm sure many of you feel life is still unfair. But you have to keep fighting. You have to keep pushing. And because you're here, I know you will. So anyway, thank you for the question.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Marta, Jordan, por vuestra pregunta. Gracias, Michael. Ahora quería dar paso a África y Imán del IES Renacimiento de Madrid, que han estado reflexionando también sobre tu libro de las virtudes cotidianas y que te querían plantear una pregunta a propósito de de la posibilidad de una moral universal en este contexto diverso y globalizado. Así que África y Imán, un fuerte aplauso para ambas.
Right.
Buenas tardes. En clase hemos estado reflexionando cómo podemos vivir en una sociedad tan diversa sin poder perder de vista ciertos valores que nos unen a todos. Por eso, nuestra pregunta es esta. ¿Cómo se debería promover una moral global de valores universales sin caer en la imposición de un pensamiento único?
Uh-huh. Well, we don't have a chance of imposing a unipolar ethic on anybody. We're in a post-imperial world. The empires are gone. The empires are destroyed. People have earned the right to govern themselves and choose their own. Again, when I was 18, when I was your age, Portugal still ruled Angola and Mozambique. There were still empires when I was a child. By 1974, they were gone. The value we need to live by now is, as I said before, is equality. But equality doesn't give me the right to tell you how to live. You're going to choose the way you want to live your life. The reason I care about Spain, the reason I care about Canada, the reason I care about Western Europe is you have the freedom to make those choices. So we're committed to freedom. We're committed to equality. We're navigating the tensions between the two. But the key thing that's happened in my lifetime is the burden of judging what do I do, what do I think, does not come from your teachers. It doesn't come from a priest. It doesn't come from your government. It comes from each one of you. And so you're listening to me, but the worst lesson you could take from what I'm saying is that you should do what I'm telling you to do. I'm talking to you as an old man who's seen a lot of things. I have some authority because I've been around the block. But the thing that's new about the world is it's up to you. You have to figure out, how do we live together? You don't have to love your neighbor. You don't have to forgive your neighbor. But you damn well have to live with your neighbor, because you haven't got any choice. And it's because you have no choice that you have to find a way to understand difference, to understand the fact that upstairs they're making a lot of noise because they're celebrating, or there's cooking smells, a different kind of food. They have different values. They have different religious values. Our societies can be destroyed if we don't allow each other and respect the freedom of judgment that each of us has. But it's a lonely business. You may have moments in your life when you feel alone. You think, what am I going to do? How do I make up my mind? That's the burden of being an adult. That's the deal. Nobody's going to tell you what to do. Your mother may be wrong, your father may be wrong, your brother may be wrong, your sister may be wrong, and you may be the only one in your family who's right. And you have to stick up for yourself. It ain't easy. But that's what it is to be an adult. None of us are children here. There you go. Thank you for your question. Wonderful question.
Muchas gracias, África, Iván. Muchas gracias, Michael, también. Ahora quería dar paso a Diego y a Davis del IES Miguel de Cervantes de Sevilla, que han estado reflexionando sobre el perdón, sobre las fuentes del perdón. Y no sé si les podríamos pasar el micrófono a Diego o a Davis. A ver. Adelante.
Hola, Michael. Que nuestra pregunta es si en entornos marcados por la violencia, como lo es Bosnia, el perdón surge como parte de nuestros valores morales por un sentimiento real o, en cambio, proviene de una necesidad de olvidar para poder avanzar en la sociedad. Gracias.
No.
Un aplauso. Muchas gracias, Davis.
Every society has to think about this problem. Spain came out of dictatorship. There were crimes under the dictatorship. Many Spaniards say, let's forget about it and move on. It's an old story. I guess the message is that History never ends. Fascism in Spain, Francoism in Spain is not over. It's never over. It's part of your history, so it's something you have to think about what it means to you. So you can't forget if you're an honest citizen. You have to remember. But it's very important not to turn memory into a weapon where you walk around saying, you're a fascist, you're a Francoist, you're connected to a dishonorable and disgraceful past. Connecting to the previous question, you got to live together. You didn't get to choose who's a Spaniard. In Spain, there are people who remember Franco with affection. I don't agree with them. But they're there. They're your fellow citizens. So what are you going to do? You can't expel them. You can't pretend that they're not there. All you can insist that they don't pretend there wasn't a problem. You can say there are certain things about the Franco regime that we all need to remember with regret and sorrow. And then the question is, how do we live together? I come from a country where you may not know, but Canada is a perfect country. But even Canada has a problem of justice. We occupied the land and settled the land and built a country from coast to coast, and the Aboriginal inhabitants of that country were shoved into reservations. And they have a different history of my country. It's a history which contradicts mine, which says, your story isn't right. So living in a country, living in Spain, living in Canada, is an encounter between histories that conflict. So what do? It isn't the case that it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's something more complicated. You have to find a place in which Franco is part of the history of Spain. The Aboriginal history of Canada is part of the history of Canada. You have to own it all. You don't pick and choose. You own it all as a citizen. And do you forgive? That was a question you asked. One of the problems with forgiving, we all think forgiveness is a good idea, right? But forgiveness is sometimes a kind of betrayal. Let me give you an example. If you were a Muslim in Bosnia, you referred to Bosnia, in 1995, the Serbs killed 12,000 people in Srebrenica and buried them in small graves. They shot them in the head. If you forgive the Serbs who did this, the problem you have is that you appear to somehow accept the injustice of their killing. And so forgiveness is very complicated. You can't forgive just by saying, that was then, it's over. Because those bodies are in the ground. And the bodies are almost speaking to you, saying, remember me, don't forget me. I was an innocent civilian and they gunned me down with a shot in the back of my head. So, it's just a question of being a serious person. A serious person doesn't forgive easily. A serious person remembers the wrong that was done. And then a serious person thinks the next question, which, okay, how do we live together? How do we go on? If you don't forgive, and what does forgiveness mean here? Forgiveness means simply the willingness to work with someone else in a common project, to accept them as citizens. You don't forget what their side did. You don't forget what Franco did. It's part of the story. You don't use that as a weapon against other people. But you decide the thing that matters here is to build the Spain of tomorrow together. In the same way that in Canada, I can't forget the wrong that we did to Aboriginal people, and I can't forgive my side for it, because I don't have the right to forgive myself for this. What I have to find is some way in which I sit down with my Aboriginal brothers and sisters and say, okay, what do we do together? How do we fix this? How do we make sure you have good schools? How to make sure you have good water? How to make sure you have good health care? How do you make sure you have the same things that we've had for 2 generations and you have not? That's the question. And then it becomes possible not to forgive, not to forget, not even to forgive, but just to keep walking into the future together and building it together. Because the shadow that hangs over all of this, I'm getting a little heavy now, I'm heavy, too serious, is civil war. If you don't fix this stuff, you start fighting and killing each other. You don't want to do that. Spain ran all the experiments on what civil war costs to society. You don't want to do that. That's something you can learn from history. Let's not do that again. And it's an issue in my country. Let's not do this again. Let's agree that fighting and killing is a very bad idea and dedicate ourselves to the future.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Michael, muchas gracias, Davis. Es desde luego un acuerdo razonable. Quería ahora dar paso a Sofía y a Karime del IES Beatriz Galindo, que han reflexionado también a partir de tu libro sobre la dificultad de la virtud y que tenían una pregunta que hacerte.
Hola, buenas. Bueno, nuestra pregunta es que, la virtud es algo que se aprende y se consolida con el tiempo.
Por ello, nos preguntamos qué le diría el Michael Ignatieff del presente a su versión del pasado, cuando era joven, a este respecto y viceversa.
¿Qué le diría el joven Ignatieff al Ignatieff actual?
Gracias.
Muchas gracias, chicas.
What a great question. What I would say to the younger Michael Ignatieff, the 18-year-old I once was, is show a little more courage. You were afraid to ask that girl out on a date. You should have asked her out on a date, right? When that teacher said something really stupid and you knew it was stupid, why didn't you say anything? Right? So what I would say to the younger me is a little more courage, please, right? And what I would say, what the younger person would say to the older person is stop being so tired. Get up off your feet and start dancing. There you go. Wonderful question. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Sofía, Karime. Gracias, Michael. La segunda de las obras que han trabajado los alumnos y las alumnas que están hoy aquí con nosotros es En busca del consuelo, donde reconstruyes la forma en que hombres y mujeres a lo largo de muchos miles de años se han enfrentado al desconsuelo y a la desesperanza. Quería dar paso a Diego y a Sad del IES Andalán de Zaragoza, que han reflexionado sobre lo difícil que es el proceso personal de afrontar el fracaso. Y a propósito de este tema, tenían una pregunta que plantearte. Muchas gracias. Diego, no se está escuchando, no sé si desde...
No hay que dejarse llevar sobre los fracasos que has ido cometiendo o los que seguramente vayas a cometer en un futuro. Estar orgulloso y aprender de ellos sería lo más importante, aunque a veces la mente no te deje sobrellevarlo. Disfrutar del proceso de fracasar es la mejor forma de poder avanzar y sobre todo aprender para no cometer este mismo error. Entonces la pregunta es, ¿alguna vez has disfrutado de un fracaso cometido? Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Diego.
Oh boy. Oh boy. These are great questions. I'm having a tough time here. I have failed big time. I was a professor at Harvard. I thought I was a pretty special guy. I went back to my country, Canada, and became the leader of one of our biggest political parties. I won 2 elections, fought like a dog for 6 years, and lost the third, lost it badly. Look it up in the book. It was a disaster. Catastrophe would be the word. So, and the morning after the failure, I got up and I thought, I'm going to have to put a bag on my head, a paper bag over my head, and wear it forever. Because everywhere I go, people will point and say, that's the guy who failed, right? And then I was going out to buy a bottle of wine, and I crossed the street, and there was an enormous cement truck. You know, one of these big, huge trucks that delivers cement to a building site. It was way above my head, and in the cab of the truck was a Sikh driver, a guy wearing a red turban. And he saw me in the street. He stopped his truck. He went like this, and I thought, and he smiled from ear to ear, and I thought, this is going to be all right. Right? So that's a story about how when you fail, a complete stranger comes to your rescue and makes you feel better about failure. What else can I say? You learn more from failure than from success. I've had some success in my life. I've loved success. I want more of it. But I'd have to say that it was failure that taught me most. Failing in politics taught me that I didn't have certain skills that I thought I had. I thought I was a pretty smart guy. I thought I was pretty good. And I discovered in politics I just wasn't as good as I thought I was. So you have to take that into yourself and say, okay, that's the truth. It's very hard to face yourself. It's very hard for us to be honest about ourselves. And failure is a terrible exposure of who you really are. And that's, somehow you have to decide, okay, I'm going to make failure work for me. I'm going to use this to deal with some of the arrogance, some of the self-deception that I had about myself. And so, but let's be honest, is there a day when I don't think about failing in politics? No. I think about it every goddamn day, right? And wish I could have done it better, and wish I could have succeeded, and I know I'll never get another chance. So you live with it. You live with it. The other thing you have to have is have a good companion. This is where marriages, companionship, is so important. I have a wife who looks at me and says, I can tell there's a shadow over you today. Get that shadow out of here, right? That's what good people can do for each other, you know? If your companion feels the weather in you and says, wake up, snap out of it. You're not dead, you're alive, you're healthy. You're talking to a bunch of wonderful students in Plaza de España. What have you got to worry about, you know? So a sense of humor helps. A sense of humor is crucial. And the other thing is not to be afraid of failure. I failed, but I'd do the whole damn thing over again. I'd try again. It's important to fail. You know, the famous line from the great writer Beckett, fail, fail again, fail better. That could be the motto for your life, you know? Thank you for the question.
Muchas gracias, Diego. Gracias, Michael. Bueno, Darío y Andrés, del Colegio Lourdes, a quien quiero pedir también que se levanten. a ver, ahí, a ver si le pueden pasar un micro. Han estado también pensando, Michael, sobre la dimensión social e histórica del consuelo. Y tienen una pregunta que plantearte al respecto. Adelante, Darío, Andrés. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, hola. Es un placer estar aquí contigo y la pregunta es, ¿cómo se puede evitar caer en la autocompasión excesiva? ¿Estamos viviendo algo así ahora sin intentar poner soluciones al fracaso social, político y vital que estamos viviendo? Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Darío, Andrés. Muchas gracias.
That's a very important and good question, and it's difficult to answer. I wrote a book about consolation, in part because I failed. And I wanted to look at all the great books of literature and art that had dealt with the issue of failure and how you deal with failure. The question is asking, is there some way in which, if you fail, you become so self-obsessed with yourself and your problems that you stop looking at the world. You stop even looking at some of the social and economic reasons why you failed. I think that's a very good caution to ask. It's a very good question, because you can become excessively compassionate to yourself and not tough enough with yourself on the one hand, and not tough enough with the world. This world is very unjust. You're going to go out and be perfectly qualified for a job. The person in the you're going to be fantastically qualified for the job. You're the best guy for the job, and you're not going to get the job. And you're going to think to yourself, that's unjust, it's unfair. And you're going to do the same, and it's going to happen to you. And it may happen many times. And you have to then deal with that. You have to have a kind of toughness, meaning, actually, it's not about me. It's not that I'm not smart and able. It's not that I'm a woman. I'm perfectly able to do this damn job. They made a mistake. It's not my fault, it's their fault. The fact that it's hard for everybody in my generation to get a job means that changes the story. There are things wrong with our society. It's not just a personal issue, it's a social issue. Why is it so hard for young people to get a good job in Spain in 2025, 2026, right? That's not a problem about you, that's a problem about Spain. So you're going to have to, as we say in Canada, put on your skates and do something about it, So consolation, when you fail, shouldn't spiral into, it's all about me. You got to ask, what are some of the economic and social and societal determinations? That's why it's a very good question, and thank you for asking it.
Gracias, Darío, Andrés, por vuestra pregunta. Brian y Amalia, del IES La Cabrera, también han trabajado sobre el consuelo, Michael, sobre tu obra En busca del consuelo, y han reflexionado sobre cómo consolarse y obtener, digamos, esperanza en momentos difíciles. Brian y Amalia, adelante, os podéis levantar, a ver si tienen un micrófono y tenían una pregunta para ti al respecto. Adelante, muchas gracias.
Hola. ¿Cómo pueden encontrar consuelo observadores y víctimas ante problemas tan graves como el genocidio palestino, el conflicto saharaui o el auge de la ultraderecha, considerándose la indiferencia generalizada y más correctamente de los poderosos?
Gracias, Brian.
There is no consolation for Gaza. There's no consolation at all. It's a catastrophe for the Palestinian people. That's obvious. It's a dark moment in the history of international law because the international law has no impact or purchase. But I would want to add that it's a disaster for the Israeli state and for the Jewish people. Every time I see a young child, age 5, wandering through those ruins asking for their mother and father, or holding out a cup to get some water, I think that 2 years of Israeli bombardment have just created another 3 generations of people who will fight and die rather than submit to Israeli occupation. And if I'll be frank with you, I have supported the State of Israel all my life. I've taught in the State of Israel. I like the State of Israel. I like being there. But this punitive attack on Gaza, which is supposed to create deterrence and security for Israel, guarantees that Israel will be under attack for the rest of the century. And that seems to me to be a tragic result. They were viciously attacked on October 7th. They had the right to defend themselves. But what they've done is without consolation, is without justification, and will have horrible consequences for decades to come. All I would plead for you, because I know them, they're personal friends. There are thousands of Israelis I know personally, or many Israelis I know personally, who think exactly the same as I do. Don't assume all of Israel is Netanyahu or the Israeli military. Don't make that mistake. There are a lot of Israelis who are mourning the death of their own society. Their own society is dying in Gaza, and then they are creating enemies for the next century. So there are no consolations. What there should be is anger and demonstrations. And there also should be assistance and aid. The International Committee of the Red Cross gets food to the starving. Organize a collection so that you can at least say you tried to feed starving Palestinian children. That's a good thing to do. That's something you can do. It's something practical. So do it if you can. So, thank you for the question.
Muchas gracias. Ahora quería pedir a Candela y a Cecilia de Líes Padre Feijó, que han también trabajado sobre la obra de En busca del consuelo y han trabajado en particular sobre tu reflexión allí sobre la cuestión de la muerte. Tenían una pregunta que plantearte al respecto.
Buenas tardes. Nuestra pregunta es...
¿Qué significa para usted una muerte digna y cuál es el papel que en ella tiene la esperanza?
Muchas gracias, Candela y Cecilia. Muchas gracias.
I had some idea I would have nothing but easy questions this afternoon, and they keep getting harder and harder.
Hacen preguntas difíciles.
I've learned one thing about this. I'm a lot closer to death, I hope, than you are. I hope all of you live long and full lives, but eventually it starts getting closer and closer. One of the people that I write about in this book on consolation was a wonderful woman who was a British nurse, and she devoted her whole life to being with people when they were dying. And she founded what I think is an institution in Spain and is an institution around the world, the hospice. When there's no further medical treatment, you go to a place called a hospice, and you're able to die in the company of your family and your loved ones. And she understood something about death, which is that I think you are apt as young people, and maybe in the audience are apt to think of death as a lonely voyage where you're on your own. And this nurse said, no, you're not on your own. It's one of the most social things you ever do, which is to die. You often die in front of other people, and in the history of dying, the history of European dying, the family is around the bed, the doctor's around the bed, the priest is around the dead. There's a choir sometimes if you were rich and they're singing. So it's a social event. And this nurse taught me that when you die, you have an opportunity to give something to those people. And what you have to give them is to show them that it's possible to die without fear. And I have been in rooms where people have died without fear. And all I can say is that nothing has done more to help me or to console me about the thought of death than seeing people die with courage and die without regret and say things like, I'm ready. So that one of the things that we don't think about death is that it's a way to communicate a message of hope to the living. And the manner in which we die can be a lesson to those we leave behind. And this is a very old story, going back to Socrates, going back to Roman and Greek philosophy. But this nurse taught me this, and she built an institution called the hospice in which people get ready to die. And it's not horrible, it's not terrible. They listen to their favorite music. They reconcile with that son they've always argued with. They make up with that brother who they couldn't stand but actually love. They repair the hurt and damage in a family in the last moments of their lives. And if you can do that, that's a pretty good way to die. Thank you for the question.
Muchas gracias. Michael, ya tenemos que terminar el acto, pero así como de los 8 colegios e institutos participantes te han estado preguntando a ti y te han hecho muchas preguntas, algunas de las cuales no nos ha dado tiempo a llegar. Antes de acabar, quería darle la vuelta y preguntarte a ti si quieres, acaso, antes de acabar el acto, hacerles alguna pregunta.
Okay. This is fun.
Ya que te han puesto, además, no te lo han puesto fácil.
Well, I think what I would like to ask one question, and I don't know who's going to answer it, but given that my generation looks at your generation and says, you're all worried, you're all frightened, you're all bewitched by social media, and you're all depressed. That's what we're being told. I don't think that's true, but that's what we're being told. So my question is, what is it that gives you hope? What is it that makes you hopeful about your future, the future of your country, the future of Europe, the future of the world? What gives you hope in either that personal dimension, the national dimension, the European dimension, or the global dimension? What gives you hope?
No sé si hay alguien de entre el público que está aquí entre nosotros que quiera responder a la pregunta de Michael, por ejemplo. Adelante. Sí, por supuesto.
Bueno, yo considero que como persona que viendo que pues cada vez es más difícil conseguir un trabajo, que cada vez la sobreinformación nos hace a su vez más desinformados sobre ciertos temas, yo creo que lo que a mí me da pues hope, que no me sale en español, perdón, es esperanza, gracias. Es el que existan personas que se sigan replanteando si sus creencias, sus pensamientos son realmente progresistas y ayudan a la humanidad a avanzar, y que sigan existiendo esas personas que piensan por sí mismas, que son capaces de, cuando alguien les da un argumento muy sólido y que tiene razón, aceptar que tiene razón y luego adaptarlo a tus propios principios y creencias. Y yo creo que eso es lo que a mí me da la esperanza de que la humanidad todavía tiene futuro, sí, eso.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Un fuerte aplauso. Muchas gracias. Bueno, quería pediros un fuerte aplauso para Michael Ignatieff también. Y un fuerte aplauso para... Gracias, Michael.
Thank you.
Y también quería pedir un fuerte aplauso a todos los representantes y las representantes de los institutos participantes que han hecho un trabajo excelente, y a los profesores y profesoras de los colegios que han participado. Y ya para terminar, quería agradecer nuevamente al comisionado para la celebración de España 50 años en libertad de haber posibilitado un encuentro tan bonito como este, donde han circulado tantas ideas y que ha puesto a pensar y a reflexionar a tantas personas a la vez. Ha sido un placer teneros con nosotros hoy, chicos y chicas, y ha sido un placer también tenerte, Michael. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.